I want to welcome Dr. Jens Bastian, who will appear in the new special series of podcasts about the North Atlantic Council that ELIAMEP launches this December. Good afternoon, Dr. Bastian.
Good afternoon, Odin.
The need to define a NATO-China policy. Who is leading this definition? What does it imply, Dr. Bastian?
As we speak, Odin, NATO foreign ministers are convening this week by video conference due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in this conference, for the first time, they address the rise of China with colleagues from also non-NATO member countries. Australia and Japan, they have been invited. In my view, the watershed moment with regard to NATO and addressing the China challenge was the December 2019 NATO leaders meeting in London. There, the NATO ministers had a joint London declaration, which they finalized. And for the first time, it included a reference to Beijing. The document stated that, and I quote from this document, we recognize, the ministers of NATO member states, we recognize that China's growing influence and international policies present both opportunities and challenges that we need to address together as an alliance. End of quote. This is unprecedented that NATO ministers singled out China. It was in many ways historic, and it highlighted a new direction for the 70-year-old alliance. With this reference to Beijing in an official NATO document, the alliance in a way forewarned that China had entered NATO's orbit and remains a strategic point of concern in a country with which NATO has to cooperate. And let me give you two examples with regard to cooperation. There is the security of telecommunications, in particular the debate surrounding 5G and Huawei technologies to include this Chinese company or not in the rollout of 5G. The other example concerns new operational domains, such as, for example, cybersecurity or outer space, cyberspace. And NATO has declared that cyberspace is part of its operational domain and that it competes with China in that domain. My last point on this issue, who's leading this definition? Clearly the debate was pushed, advocated by the United States. The former US Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, he already argued in 2017 that NATO members would be challenged by their ability to address a more assertive China. Who leads this debate about NATO and China in Europe? By and large, Germany and France have gradually come on board to identify EU parameters of such a policy challenge. The role of Britain is equally important, but it remains ambiguous in light of its post-Brexit stance with regard to China. So much to the first question.
Well, Dr. Bastian, China is broadening its strategic footprint on NATO's doorsteps. What does Serbia's security cooperation with China mean? Is the Belt and Road Initiative a security challenge for NATO?
Odin, let me start with the last aspect. China's signature foreign economic policy, the Belt and Road Initiative. That is indeed a challenge for NATO, not so much with regard to what China is constructing in terms of transport networks in the Belt and Road Initiative. It rather addresses a different challenge for NATO, namely that the Belt and Road Initiative can selectively draw certain European countries into alignment with China's interests. And there are countries which have signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative, are part of it, and where NATO is concerned, to say the least. These countries include Greece, Hungary, Portugal, Italy, and the 5 NATO members from the Western Balkans: North Macedonia, Albania, Montenegro, Slovenia, and Croatia. With regard to Serbia's security cooperation with China, this is a matter of concern. Serbia is not a member of NATO, but it is, in terms of geography, at the doorsteps of the geography of NATO. And here China has, in the course of last year, broadened its strategic footprint. For the first time, China has opened a new channel of cooperation by entering into the European arms market. More specifically, in June 2020, Serbian Air Force received 6 combat drones which are armed with laser-guided missiles from China. Serbia is the first European country to deploy such Chinese unmanned aerial vehicles. Hence, it is a matter of concern not only for the NATO members in the Western Balkans, but more generally with regard to how China is gradually moving into the European arms market, and hence it is a challenge that including NATO must address.
Well, we understand by all that China seeks a multipolar alternative that challenges the Western-led traditional security concept. What does that mean in practice, Dr. Bastian? And are there any empirical cases that you can tell us about?
What this debate about security concepts highlights is a competition of narratives between China and NATO members, in particular between China and the United States. China seeks a multipolar alternative that challenges what it considers to be the Western-led traditional security concept. By contrast, it tries to define and recalibrate a narrative that replaces this traditional point of view with a Chinese-defined, what it argues is a shared security concept. And it tries to do that by gradually growing its engagement and also underlining hence such a shared security concept in different areas of the globe. For example, China is growing engagement in the Mediterranean. This is very much driven by maritime connectivity, where China invests in Mediterranean ports in Turkey, NATO member, Egypt, Greece, Italy, and Portugal, all NATO members, as well as Malta, Spain, and Bulgaria. China is also providing a variety of public goods in regions and countries where NATO members are active as peacekeepers. For example, China is making available thousands of peacekeeping troops to UN security organizations, security services, and anti-piracy efforts. You can thereby see that China has a growing willingness with regard to such a shared security concept, a growing willingness to involve itself in regional conflict mediation.
How do you see the way forward, Dr. Bastian, regarding NATO and China policy making?
The way forward is one where I would argue that China's rise in the course of the past 2 decades is at such a scale and at such proximity today to core NATO interests that no member, no ally of NATO can afford to ignore China's importance. Equally, Beijing is extending, as I've just argued, its military reach and its conceptual definition of this military reach to the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and the Arctic. NATO also must be aware and react to the increasing military and technological cooperation between Russia and China and how this affects the NATO alliance. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization will therefore, in my view, today and in the coming years, urgently devote more of its time and, more importantly, more of its resources, financial, military, and diplomatic resources, to security threats that can be posed by China. In a way, NATO has to adapt itself for an era of what some observers have called great power competition that includes not only NATO and Russia, but also increasingly NATO and China. And in a way, and this is my concluding argument, in a way what we are seeing as NATO takes much more attention with regard to China is that the arrival of China at NATO's doorsteps may actually have started to bring what President Macron once labeled a brain-dead institution again closer together. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bastian, for this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Odin.